Hello and welcome to episode number 34 of the vCD Roundtable. Today's topic is we are going to come back to Cloud Director 10.6 for a bit, and we are going to focus a bit on the networking bits and pieces of 10.6 and might divert here and there to some add-on scenarios like ALB, but I would say let's start first with the main scenarios and do a quick round of hellos. Matthias?
Yeah, hello, Matthias. Back again. Missed last recording, I think.
Hi, I'm Sasha.
Hello, guys.
Welcome.
Tobias here as well. Welcome to episode 34.
So, Matthias, you missed the last episode, and you actually, as far as I remember, a few weeks back put this product or this item on the agenda list. So, you have two good reasons to give it a start.
Yeah, thanks. It's always blame the Austrians. With Cut Director 10.6 and the new NSX releases, we have some really interesting changes. But the changes in the networking pieces are more on the Cloud Director side. It's less NSX because NSX was able to do that for, I have no idea since which version, but let's dive into it. So one of the big game changers is the ability to import a parent T0 and VRFs. That sounds a bit weird from the beginning, but in the past you were able to either import a T0 gateway or a VRF, but you were not able to import the parent T0 of the VRF, and that's now possible in Cloud Director 10.6. Does not sound like a big game changer. Honestly speaking, it is from an architectural perspective because first and foremost, a dedicated VRF for a customer or a tenant enables dedicated routing tables and dedicated BGP sessions for these customers. And from now on, we can use the parent T0 to inject, for example, a services gateway. What is a services T1? A services T1 enables the service provider to offer services like maybe DNS or NTP appliances, authentication services, maybe file services, whatever. In the past, we always designed having a dedicated T0 for the CSP with one or multiple T1s to host the CSP services. We can now just deploy another T1, and that's a big game changer because we can reduce the number of edge transport nodes needed, because remember, for each active T0, we need one edge transport node. And secondly, the routing got more complex because if we now have just a services T1 for the CSP, it's attached to the distributed router of the upstream T0. So all the different routers are connected to the same routing space and just consume it via the distributed routing. So that's pretty cool. Speaking about VRFs, it also enables tenants to have dedicated external networks. In the past, it was pretty complex to attach dedicated networks for a tenant and provide routing and provide services and so on and so forth. We played a lot with service interfaces on T1s in the past, but they're still not part of the Cloud Director UI. So it's supported, it's doable, but it's always a managed service. But now we can attach external networks to the VRF of the tenant and still import the parent T0 and enable CSP services with a dedicated T1. I think that's a big game changer in here. Between all the different VRFs and T0s, we just use inter-VRF routing. We can use BGP route leaking and those configurations to establish a proper routing topology. We can also enable, like, build a NAP, build firewall rules on the upstream VRF for the tenants. So that's pretty interesting. There's only one caveat. If we would like to allow NAT, for example, on the upstream device, we still need to place the T0 in active standby. So the new active, I think it's called stateful gateway in NSX. That's still not part of the Cloud Director UI. It's part of NSX, not of the Cloud Director UI. And speaking of BGP route leaking and additional features with the VRF Lite import in 10.6, there is another really cool feature, because for the VCF, we can now enable just certain BGP configurations to the tenant. So in the past, we could import a T0, a provider gateway, attach, or a VRF Lite, right? Either or. Attach an edge gateway and flip the switch for dedicated. The switch with dedicated just enabled the tenant to view and change the BGP configuration depending on rights and roles, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but it was just BGP, yes or no. So the tenant could, if we enabled the configuration bits and pieces, it was like he could change the neighbors. He could deal with IP prefix lists. He could change or deal with communities, route maps, and so on and so forth. No, these are the four topics in the BGP. From 10.6 on, we can change or configure the permissions for those 4 areas independently. So we could only allow the view of neighbors, but we could enable a tenant to manage IP prefix lists. So that's a very interesting granularity in terms of permissions. I think it's called BGP permission groups is the new name for it. So that's really nice with 10.6. Also in Cloud Director, we can now download routing tables. Makes sense, being honest, because as we're all aware of, if we deal with NSX natively and if we are in the CSP role talking NSX, we always have access to the edge transport nodes. We just logged in via SSH, access the different VRFs and validated routing tables, BGP advertisements, and routes we have learned, and so on and so forth. But what if we enable BGP and BGP configuration for a tenant? The tenant does not have those capabilities, and we can't, except we deploy dedicated edge transport nodes. We cannot enable access for a tenant via SSH to an edge transport node for many different reasons. So if a customer configured BGP and it was not working, he had no chance to troubleshoot BGP from the CSP side. So only the troubleshooting was only doable from the peer side. But what if both peers are inside the same cloud infrastructure, which is even possible, right? So there is no troubleshooting capabilities. Now we can at least download the routing table via the GUI. I know it's not how we see the yellow from the egg, so it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing, right? At least we had those troubleshooting capabilities for IPsec VPN, but yeah, that's a different story. Another interesting part talking about NSX and Cloud Director is the Edge Gateway part. I had a ton of discussions in the last few months, and we had to make a ton of design decisions if we deploy edge gateways in either distributed mode, what I think is mostly referred to headless mode, so no service router instance on a T1. Why should I do that? To consume less resources, because if we are using a T1 without any stateful services like firewall rules, VPN, or NAT, we could just deploy an gateway without a service router and use the distributor route. The distributor the DR part only. So that's not disaster recovery, that's distributed routing. So yeah, sometimes so it's hard. So to use the distributed router part only. In the past, it was a big challenge to implement it this way because we had to deploy the T1 in headless mode via NSX, attach segments via NSX UI or API, and import those segments into Cloud Director as org VDC networks. But from now on, the customer or the tenant had no access to network management anymore because the import of the network needs to be done by a sysadmin. So a headless T1 or a headless edge gateway was only consumable as a managed service. But now with the new 10.6 version, we can deploy it in headless mode as well. One of the last features which I would like to cover today, and I think that's what we heard a lot in the past, was the logging. So the logging part of networking. So what is meant with logging? Like if you enable logging on a firewall rule, either edge or distributed firewall, the log entry or the log entry is forwarded to a syslog collector. In our case, it should be ARIA operations for logs. The issue is that ARIA operations for log itself is not a multi-tenant product on the one hand. On the other hand, we had the issue that an edge transport node is not multi-tenant capable because the edge transport node hosts the T0 and a ton of T1s. So it's kind of a shared infrastructure between many tenants. The new part, the tenant network logging, enables, and I think it's only possible with ARIA operations for logs, but it doesn't matter because it's part of VCF. So it's there anyway, also for the physical components. But for the tenants, the logging is now enabled for tenants that can browse the logs either via the UI or API. That's done based on rule ID. So with 10.6, we don't need NSX projects for this integration. It's kind of native because Cloud Director knows which rule IDs belong to which tenant. And based on this knowledge, Cloud Director is able to display log entries. That's very useful because we're all aware if we're troubleshooting a firewall rule set, ideally you see in the log certain traffic is blocked by rule ID XYZ, and then you can start troubleshooting like, oh, why is the traffic blah, 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 blah. So that's a big game changer. And out of my head, being honest, it enables CSPs to come up with even more interesting managed products in their product catalog to offer, like, all right, you have the logs, you can build the firewall rules on your own. So it's a self-service solution. If you have an issue, you need to pay for support. All right, so these were like a few big game changers I would like to cover with Cloud Director 10.6. Before I hand over to Toby for the ALB part, so what's new with 10.6 and ALB, the last important sentence I always say is, please, before you upgrade to 10.6, read the release notes and read the interoperability metrics. All right, Toby.
That's not true.
And maybe really quick before we head over to Toby, Matthias, can you kind of actually, this was a lot about the things which this brings to, a mixture between what it brings to service providers and what it brings to end customers. Can you potentially try to summarize in 2 sentences what the advantages of the new features are for service providers and in 2 sentences what they are for customers? You can build long sentences.
So for CSPs is a big advantage is less edge transport nodes because of parent T0 import together with VRF lights. Less edge transport nodes, less vCPUs, less firewall licenses. That's simple. So it's a cost thing. For tenants, and of course the more granular permissions, especially in the BGP part, so they can hand over more dynamic routing configuration bits and pieces to tenants. For tenants, the big game changer is getting more flexibility out of the whole construct with the CSP together, and of course the advanced or the more in-depth log view in firewall rules is big. So for CSPs, please implement ARIA operations for log now.
No, right now.
I think people can wait until Toby is finished with this part.
Okay. So, yeah, ALB. First of all, the name has changed. So it is now ALB. NSX ALB is gone. The final product name or the new product name is only Advanced Load Balancer, which is quite interesting, to be honest. But not from a technical perspective, not really. One of the first things I would like to cover, the integration of NSX of ALB has started. I think 10.3 was the first release where it was possible to integrate the advanced load balancer. And in the beginning, it was more or less really just the replacement of NSX for vSphere. And since ALB has much more capabilities, those capabilities were missing clearly in the UI. And now with the release of 10.6, the first thing which is now clearly gone is the whole story behind the health monitor. Because in the past, or until of the release of 10.6, it was only possible that you use the predefined health monitor of Cloud Director. So it was basic ICMP ping test, TCP or UDP connection test, and HTTP, HTTPS basic monitor. Now with the release of 10.6, the customer can clearly build his own health monitor, which brings the huge advantage that the service provider now can really offer load balancing as a service, because the tenant can provide their own health checks, can ramp up the whole load balancing now really from the Cloud Director UI, and don't need to work together with the CSP to have the right health check and the right health monitoring. So that's one of the biggest advantages. Still, we are missing some of the bits, to be honest. So still, web application firewalling is not there, but hopefully with one of the next releases, also this feature should then show up into Cloud Director, that I also get the capability of using the web application firewall from ALB, because it's the same like Matthias mentioned before, part of the new licensing, to be honest, not part of the VCF licensing, but part of the new ALB licensing. You always will have web application firewall. So all of the enterprise features, or formerly known as enterprise features of ALB, are now part in the license. The second thing is, to be honest, quite interesting for larger CSPs. So if you have multiple ALB controller instances or controller cluster connecting to the same NSX cloud, in the past or in the up to the release 10.6, you always need to manually decide which controller cluster should now be utilized to place the new load balancers. Now with the release of 10.6, Cloud Director gets the information, hey, which ALB controller cluster is connected to which NSX manager or to which NSX cloud, and based on the utilization of your environment, he can now automatically join which ALB environment should serve the load balancer. But to be honest, it's only interesting if you have multiple ALB control instances. If you just go with a single one, okay, this is not really something which is quite an important improvement. One last thing, and this is affecting both environments, also both sides. So this is affecting NSX and also ALB, is stuff which is called IPAM reservation, which has, I'm not sure if it has really been introduced with 10.6, because from my perspective, it was already there in 10.5. But now what you can now do is that the tenant can reserve IP addresses from the organization VDC network pool for future use, so that he can really say, okay, I know in the future I need 5 IP addresses and I would like to have them in a sequence, so I can now reserve the IP addresses and can assign them to different services already upfront to say, okay, this IP address should be reserved for DNS, this IP address should be reserved for NAT, this IP address for VPN. So you can now really create a manual reservation on your network pool and bring up the IP address in sequence that you really say, okay, from whatever IP address to whatever IP address, they are reserved for my environment. They can be utilized inside NSX and also on the load balancer side. Yeah, that's it from ALB perspective.
Here's the button. Good. I mean, it seems like we get more and more finally to the point that they build all the features and functions into the Cloud Director or into the system so that they are really fully multi-tenanted available. Clearly, a lot of the features we see now are still related to developments which have started already before the final, let's say, Broadcom takeover, because especially in vCD, typically everything takes a bit longer due to all the changes and checks on the multi-tenant features and stuff like that. But it seems like we are finally getting there. So I think that's a good motion. Maybe now that we've spoken about what we have, what are we missing? What do we want to have? I mean, we know that VMware is listening to us by now, not only the podcast, but a lot of other social media streams we do. So, no, but I think this is the point. I mean, we get the feedback from our customers and we feed that feedback back. But what are currently the most or the biggest blockers, not bloggers, blockers. It's still early here in California, and it's already above 30 degrees. So what are the biggest blockers? Sasha was so quiet the whole time. What is currently missing in the networking space?
Well, I currently don't know. So from my perspective, it's more the struggling about the licensing stuff, because what I got in the last weeks was more and more questions about what does means a manual change in a distributed firewall to have the need to license distributed firewall. For example, if we are going with with Tanzu, they automatically create distributed firewall rules in NSXT. But do I need distributed firewall as a service provider at that place? So that are currently more or less the biggest questions of the service providers I got. And also, from the design perspective, and that will become interesting to figure it out. Hopefully, latest at the Explore in Vegas. And
So something I would really love to see, honestly speaking, is the ability of a service interface. I know it has a ton of implications because the service interface needs to be connected to a VLAN and so on and so forth. So someone needs to build the VLAN underneath. But at least a few mode in Cloud Director of a service interface to enable a tenant to build firewall rules for workloads connected to the service interface. So that's something I would love to see.
One hand, 100% on Matthias' side, service interface is something which would be quite nice. But yeah, it will be a mixture between manual or service CSP integration and tenant. But otherwise, from a technical perspective, I clearly would say IDS IPS on the security side, URL filtering on the security side, and mostly, that's my biggest pain point for so many service providers, route-based BGP setup on VPN side on a tier 1 gateway. That's one of the biggest pain points I see from many service providers to say, hey, you need to utilize route-based, not policy-based. Sasha, we have an echo. Thank you. Thank you. I need to set up a route-based IPsec VPN, but not really in a static manner. I would like to have it fully with a dynamic routing protocol. And to be honest, for me, BGP is fine. I don't care about OSPF, but BGP would be needed. And on the ALB side, as mentioned before, web application firewall.
Nice. I can make Toby happy instantly, because route-based IPsec VPN is there in 10.6.
Yeah, it is there, but still with a static routing configuration, no dynamic routing.
You could use BGP auto configuration. And then we need to check what it's doing, but it needs some testing. But it's getting there. But yeah,
it will get there. But still, I was hoping that it is there on 10.6 because I had already a look, and I also had a look into Tom's article. And still, he says, if you really would like to have it dynamically,
it's not fully blown. And it's still the same. Still the issue with the active standby on the T0.
On the T0, yeah.
That's a big design challenge again. Yeah.
But security. I from my perspective, from technical side, security and IPsec VPN. Those are
honestly, Toby, I love that you mentioned IDS IPS because I didn't thought that through, but at least gateway IDS IPS on per tenant to hand over into self-service, that would be really nice.
And honestly speaking, to get gateway IDS IPS on NSXT would be already nice. Currently only IDS. Still no IPS.
One step after the other.
And I would still say I would love to see a lot more troubleshooting tools and stuff like that, so that we can get the finally the tenants to do a lot more troubleshooting by themselves, especially when it comes to when they configure VPNs and a lot of other things. We all know that sometimes it's a lot easier if you can directly mess around with troubleshooting tools from the edges and everything else. And I mean, it clearly keeps some work for the service providers, but I think many of them would be happy if the tenant would have something simple in their infrastructure, which they could use for trace routes, pings, and potentially even build in some of the troubleshooting interfaces which you normally have in the NSX manager, especially if we want to seek more customers adopt things like distributed firewall, because this is basically impossible to troubleshoot from a tenant perspective if you enable it.
But if, to be honest, this is something, and I think Matthias mentioned it, but maybe not in the right. He mentioned it in the right way, but what I would like to add here with Login Site in Cloud Director, they finally got a nice looking web UI for Login Site, because I have seen some previews, and I have seen it also now in a technical session. It is really well done in Cloud Director, so you clearly see is it drop, is it accepted, by which rule. So from a troubleshooting perspective, from firewalling only, check mark.
You just need to enable logging on a per rule base, but as a service provider, you just need to remember that you need to configure the syslog collector in our infrastructure. But yeah, that's something. But now in NSX, it can be done very easily via the all NSX node configuration thingy. But yeah, that's very useful. But I think Eve was more thinking about the traffic flow tool, which is part of
Trace flow.
NSX.
Trace flow in the VCD UI, then we are really ready to run. Yeah.
And I used it a lot in the past couple of days because for troubleshooting. Believe it or not, DFW. The only downside, you cannot just expose it because it would expose too much of the underlying infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult.
Yeah, but I would assume, and I'm not sure if you have played around it, there is already the live trace path, not the trace flow, and there you get all of the necessary info, just the basic information. Hey, where is the traffic failing? And both of the tools, this is also NSX related, has now with the 4.1.2 release has been already expanded to VPN as well. So with TracePath and with TraceFlow, you can also troubleshoot your VPN connectivity. Yeah. So this is also something I clearly would like to have integrated into VCD, that the customer can use it by themselves.
Good. Okay, I think we created a long feature list. We will actually sum that up from the video and actually take that to the advisory board potentially during Explore, should there be one. We still working out on final schedules, but we at least will make sure that we get all of these things covered. Good. That being said, we are already at 30 minutes over, so or not 30 minutes over, but over 30 minutes. So I think that perfectly wraps up this edition. The next one is going to be our final ramp up for Explore with all our expectations for Explore, everything we are planning to. Again, for those who haven't seen it and who are going to come and join for Explore, we by now have the registration page for the poker tournament up and running. So don't forget to register yourself for the poker tournament if you want to join us for that one on Monday. And because we are going to potentially run out of seats end of this week, maybe next week. So be fast. And the other thing is, if you want to meet up and catch us in person, we have the Customer Briefing Center at the Venetian as well. We have also links to the appointment page on the event webpage. And if you see on LinkedIn and other social media, we will have it there from time to time. And we will post it in the comment section of this live video after the show. That being said, I would say thank you all for listening or watching, and have a good day.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.